John 21. Quite a few, if not all of us, know what it is like to be confined. Before meeting Jesus, the disciples had full, busy and demanding jobs and interests. Apart from family, work and politics, the men went where they wanted, whenever they chose. When they hooked up with Jesus, life was even more demanding. There were crowds to deal with, hectic schedule of touring, and the pressure of death threats which culminated in the crucifixion. The disciples had retreated into hiding. Whilst Jesus' resurrection was a cause for great celebration, his command was to wait. This group of men and women were not used to delay. Jesus knew God's timing. During the 40 days before his ascension, Acts 1:3, he appeared to the disciples and groups of people. He taught, encouraged and corrected them. On this evening, perhaps the group was short of funds. Judas no doubt had left them bankrupt. But more likely, one night frustration brought on by physical inactivity bubbled over. Just like these 11, God takes us through seasons if we will let him quiet. He will withdraw us from public life, ministry, employment, friendship or social life. These can be painful and yet rewarding times. We are challenged to draw closer to God and let him be our source. No doubt Peter, the man of action, found this time of seclusion difficult. Initially he had hidden away out of fear and shame. His personal encounter with Jesus, Luke 24:34, brought reconciliation and relief, but did not satisfy him for long. Perhaps he yearned for something familiar that would tax his strength. What better than a fishing trip? It would provide food, finance and distraction. So out of the blue he announced, "I'm going fishing," and everyone joined in. God understands his needs. He did not intervene to prevent the trip. The men worked hard, rowing, casting their nets and searching for fish all night. Hidden from view, Jesus looked on until dawn when the men started back, defeated and disappointed. If you are in this place at the moment, unsettled and needing to do something, wanting to take part in some sort of activity or enterprise, God understands. He made us flesh and blood. He gave us muscles and a mind. These times of being set aside will come to an end. In the meantime, we may need some light relief. So who is to say that this fishing trip was wrong? Jesus did not rebuke them. Instead, he ordained a mighty catch of fish. But Scripture cannot be used to justify doing our own thing. Frustration and boredom can be hard to cope with, but there's great danger in launching out on our own. I wonder if the disciples were just beginning to question if they should have been out on the water at all. On the shore, a stranger called out to them, "Lads." They lifted their eyes, perhaps for the first time that night. With honesty they confirmed they had no fish. Tacitly they agreed that it seemed like a waste of time. But the exchange sprung something into their lives. Defeat did not seem so inevitable. Why not try one more time? Sometimes when reaching the end of ourselves, when boredom and frustration is compounded by failure, it can be hard to lift ourselves up for one final push. This is when it is vital that this last enterprise is God ordained. We need to wait for the command that tells us where to expend our last endeavours. At this moment in Scripture, the invisible onlooker, Jesus, allowed himself to be seen. John 21:1. God promises we are never alone, which means we need not be far from his plans and his blessing. Just like the disciples, we need to hear the call, just some 100 yards away. So why did Jesus provide the catch of fish? Did the men need something more than just practical provision of food and warmth? When our hands are empty and our days seem fruitless, God in his grace provides relief. Remember, he encouraged Noah after endless days on a drifting boat. He sent the dove back with a twig. This showed him that the land was drying out and things were growing. The circumstances were changing. They would be able to move onto dry land soon. Just so, the catch reminded the men of God's provision. Jesus reassured them. His love reached out to each man as he dispensed breakfast with a glance or touch of the hand. But he did not do it all for them. He left room for their contribution by asking for some fish from their haul. No doubt as they shared this meal it swept away the feelings of frustration and inactivity. But some still questioned in their minds what the future held. Simon was to be refined, but this time by Jesus rather than Satan. The group informally recognised Simon's leadership when they tumbled into the fishing enterprise. A leader needs followers. But Simon's character flaws were still evident. Firstly, he had led them into a fruitless night of activity. That had to stop. He could no longer allow impatience to force his hand. To show him the second impediment, Jesus took Simon for a stroll down the beach. Uncomfortably, he asked Simon to measure the amount of love he had for him. Did it reach the heights of agape, self-denying? Simon's response was guarded. He described his love as brotherly, phileo. Painfully had been taught that boasting and pride had to go. Thirdly, whatever the cost or final destination, his primary function as a leader was to follow. Jesus warned him the future would go against his natural inclinations. It would be costly and should not be taken lightly or without consideration. This provoked the final part of his nature, rivalry with John. Had this sense of competition launched him into ill-judged promises the night of Jesus' arrest? Jesus needed to deal with the relationship of the two men. His rebuke was powerful at such a sensitive time. When Simon asked about John's future, the response was, "What concern is that of yours?" Clearly there had been a strong bond between Jesus and John. Simon had to drop any sense of inferiority. Just like him, before we start the next phase of our lives, there may be some issues that Jesus needs to confront. Here it all started with a powder keg of seclusion, a fishing trip, barbecue, and a morning stroll. With Jesus, the ordinary things in life become extraordinary and worthwhile.